We're going to start with, so the next panelists here, we're going to get to them in a sec. It's lessons from selling a supply chain business. So first, I'm just going to do a little industry update, what's going on in the industry from, what we're looking at from the US side and the Canadian side from a call it recessionary standpoint is what we're expecting to and how it relates to M&A. So I'll give you a little rundown of that first, and then we'll get into the panelists shortly after. Great. Well, thank you everybody for being here. Before we discuss the lessons on how, all the panelists here have been through the stages of selling a business, just want to give a state of the freight industry in general and, look at the recent signs of the recovery that we're seeing already in the States. Canada lags a little bit behind that, obviously, and how it relates to things going on in the world. There's potential tariffs that we're seeing on tweets or everything else the last couple of days. So there's a lot of things happening, and just run through a little bit of that so everyone gets an idea where things are happening in the industry. So some pause news. So in the US, from a strictly analytical perspective, the freight recession is ending. There's been, solid several months in a row of truck tonnage increase. So it's been about 1.2% since October, and it's been 4 consecutive months. So we're getting out of that rut from the US side. And again, I get to the Canadian side, we're about 4 to 8 months behind. There's, been a steady uptick of, freight volumes since January 2024, about 3%. So that's slowly increasing. The rates will come later, but it's slowly getting out of the very bottom of the freight market that's been over the last, really since fall of 2022. So it's been extremely long and the longest freight recession that we've seen from a cyclicality standpoint. So it's been extremely long. So a lot of you guys here today obviously lived and breathed and experienced it. Probably, to a point of saying when's the end, but the great thing is we're getting towards the end of that. We're seeing a lot on sort of the Port of Los Angeles. There's been, the last 4 consecutive months, there's been over just 900,000 containers each month. And that's an uptick of about 2.97%. Same thing in the Port of Montreal. So they've increased their volumes. Now, this is taking away the fact that there have been labor disruptions. So keep that in mind. So if you remove the labor disruption time periods, that there's been slow increases too in the tonnage, which is great for freight coming inbound. So that's been great. Some of the things that we're seeing in the market now, just even recently, is because of the tariff talk with the new administration coming in. And we knew that going in with the election of Donald Trump, that there's been a steady influx of freight, people trying to bring it into the US inbound because of the potential of tariffs happening. So there might be some residual effect of inbound freight increasing volumes and rates just because of, the next couple of months of not knowing what's going to happen until January 20th. So they're in some of the spaces everyone's in, you might see a little bit of that influx. It's not going to be major, but at least that's pushing things up from, volume perspective and a rate perspective. So expect that it's going to continue on probably until January 20th or until, the new leadership realizes that a 25% tariff might not be the best thing for everybody in general, Canada, Mexico, and the American people too. So keep that in mind. With, a road to recovery that we're seeing on the US side, the US side of the market's been really shifting from that volume perspective we talked about. The rates are still lagging behind. So there's only been a 1% increase on the US side. In the Canadian market's 4 to 8 months behind the US. So the recovery just started in the fall, like literally in October, November in the US. So it's pretty brand new. And again, that's not every sector in the transportation space, right? There's some sectors that have fared better than others. Obviously, look at dry van cross-border has been hit the most, right? And that's either from an asset-based or a non-asset-based perspective. So in other areas from bulk and specialized like flatbed, they've seen better rates come through as well as volumes on certain lanes. So just keep that in mind too. So once we see that rebalancing happening, we've seen since 2022, when the freight recession started to get towards its low point in early 23, that there's been a 7% year-over-year improvement of spot rates. Again, that's coming from the US perspective. Canadian markets, again, lags behind. So just keep that in mind, that it's always from a cyclicality standpoint, from deregulation, it's a 4 to 8 month lag in the Canadian market. So for most everyone here, the recession is still occurring, it's still happening, and it's probably going to get into about Q1, Q2 of 2025. The great thing is the US is already moving in that direction. We're in that direction shortly after. So it's positive signs that we're seeing. And with that, how that relates to the M&A standpoint, a lot of people over the last 2 years have been holding off from selling their businesses or exiting their businesses. And because of the market's been kind of where it has been. So as we move out of that, we're presuming to see a large increase of people coming to the market to eventually sell in 2025 and like kind of Q2, Q3, 2025 and into 2026. So it's going to be a pretty busy year for M&A for the second half of next year, 2026, et cetera. So a lot of people for 2 years of people looking at exiting because of retirement, because of age and everything else. That's going to be all coming to the market fairly soon. It's still, at this point, it's still a little bit of a buyer's market, but it's slowly shifting. We're going to see it shift to the seller's market really in that Q2 2025 and then beyond. So just keep that in mind. If everyone's looking to buy businesses, still a decent time. And on the sell market, it's getting better and better to have a better outcome when the time is ready to exit. So there's a lot of good opportunities coming. Again, it's call it another 4 to 8 months on the Canadian side. So expect some positive movement in the Canadian market coming soon, as we see in the US. Again, there's some word abnormalities with the tariff talk, but I think by call it a couple of weeks after Donald Trump's in office, we'll see whether what's true or not. So we'll figure that out. And I guess that's everybody's guess. So you can't predict that. It's obviously he's quite unpredictable in that market. So we'll find out. That gives a little bit of a freight update on what's happening in the market, M&A from a recessionary standpoint, and we're moving towards the exit of it. So I can appreciate filling everybody in on that, and we could talk more about that too. More than anything, a lot of our team here, we educate people on what's going on in the market from a high level and to a macro, from a macro level all the way to a micro level of subsectors in the transportation space: flatbed, dry van, logistics, freight forwarding, customs brokerage, et cetera. So we're quite attuned to all those different markets. So if anybody needs to talk to any of us, we do that all the time, and we're here to help out. So appreciate that. Now off to our panelists here that made their way down. So I appreciate everybody coming here today. And what I'm going to do is do a quick introduction of, or I'm going to introduce everyone's name and then get them to do a quick introduction themselves. So we're going to start off with Bill Emmett, who's the vice president, or was the vice president of Swift Delivery Systems. Then we'll go off to David Firman, who's president of KPCL Acquisitions, and that was Key Point Carriers that was transacted. And Chris Gerber, general manager from Liberty Linehaul, Canada, US. So I'm going to start with Bill to introduce himself.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. First and foremost, thanks to Left Lane for the invite today, being able to participate with these gentlemen and meeting you fine folks. Some familiar faces in the crowd today, so it's good to see everybody. Being that it's Thanksgiving in the US, with Thanksgiving and football, I'm a Cowboys fan, so this is probably time well spent for me.
If I knew that beforehand, I might have considered things differently.
Tough act to follow with Mike, but we're going to do our best. And just on the presentation from this morning, if any of you had a deer in the headlights moment, as Megan was talking about trust funds and so on, I urge you to make a phone call. If you're going to take anything out of today, it's valuation of your business and understanding tax repercussions. It's really, really important. I started out in this crazy industry back in 1987. I was a driver at Swift Delivery Systems in Ottawa, and I worked my way into the office. My last role there was director of operations. So I spent 8 years there and left for an opportunity with Dynamics. I spent 17 great years with Dynamics, progressive roles, with the last one being vice president corporate development. Basically meant that I was involved with franchising and acquisitions. Dynamics was purchased by Transforce, as most of you know, and first year was great. Second year, not so much. I was packaged out with a number of my colleagues, and so joined back with Dave at DVD, Dave at Swift, for round 2, and that was in 2013. Partnered up with Dave, and then we sold the business March 1st of this year. Dave retired immediately. It was a start the car type of moment, and then myself, I retired on September 9th of this year. So vice president, yes, but retired. We'll pass it over to Dave.
David Firman.
Oh, thank you, everyone. I've been in I guess logistics, all of my career, much like Mike, my first business was a flower importation business out of Colombia and Florida. And that led to starting a brokerage business, which I held for about 15 years, and then sold that to the Contrans Group, who's now part of TFI. After that, spent a bit of time with them building their logistics arm, bought a couple of more businesses and got that logistic piece up to about $100 million. And then I left thinking I wanted some time off, which I really didn't, but spent some time in the merger and acquisition world, brokering some deals. And I guess about 7 years ago, got the itch to get back into owning businesses. And my partner and I started a company, KPCL Acquisitions Ltd, and began purchasing companies that we thought were well run under a specific model, and trying to grow that platform through individual purchases and sometimes the sale, which I'm going to talk about today, and also looking at certain tuck-ins. So that's what we're all about.
Thank you, David. And off to Chris, who didn't sell to TFI, by the way.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Left Lane, for having me down today. Mike, great job earlier. You struck a few chords today with me, the emotional side of selling the business as well and preparing for it. So I grew up in trucking. Fortunately enough, I was a driver. I got to experience the going up and down the road every day. And I had this epiphany coming back from Chicago one time that I wanted to get in the office and start in logistics. So I was lucky enough that I was working with good people that brought me in off the road. I worked in the warehouse and grew myself into operations. From there, I went into operations manager. From operations manager, I became partner. And from there, I drew the short straw and got to move to sunny Southern California. I enjoyed many years out there creating a new company called Liberty Linehaul West. I enjoyed that. The weather was fun. And then it was time to move back to corporate. One thing is, when I did that, it was a great experience starting a company right from the ground floor. And that's something we did. And a very wise man told me when we did that, he said, don't just focus on cross-dock, get US trucks rolling. So we did that. And then I moved back to Canada, and my partner, Greg Dubuque, he grew that business, and he's now grown it into the entertainment world as well. And I moved back to Canada and grew Liberty Linehaul Incorporated in Canada. And this past year, March 2023, we sold the business to KTG. And that's basically my story.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks, everybody. So what we'll do is ask some questions and get some of the panelists for some answers here. So first question is about motivations. And what motivated you to decide to sell the business at the time you did? And were there aspects in the sale process that surprised you? So we could start off. Yeah, Bill.
So we didn't really want to sell. For Dave and I, it was a lifestyle business. We were making money, having fun. Everything was going great. We had a good team around us. And then, like Mike said earlier, you never know what's going to happen. And unfortunately, tragedy struck our little company. And the first piece of that was my business partner, Dave, finds out that he's going to be battling throat cancer. So he's obviously got some radiation treatments. We wrap our arms around him as best we can. We pull up our socks as it relates to taking on the workload. And, as a team and as a family, we did the best we can. But then he gets his second kick in the gut in August. So he's got his last two treatments on the Monday, and the Saturday night before his last two treatments, his wife unexpectedly passes away in her sleep. So having been in the business that long with Dave and Jen, they're personal friends, we're all heartbroken. The office, everybody knows them. Dave did his best over the next year. He was certainly supportive of us when we needed him to be in the office. but we were equally trying to be supportive for him and his family. Ultimately, about a year in, he came into my office. It was on a Friday, closed the door and said, "Look, bud, I need to tap out." So we said, okay, we talked about it and said, okay, well, let's regroup. We'll take the weekend. Let's think about some things. And we met on the following Tuesday and decided to go down this road, get Left Lane involved in our process. And that's where we ended up. Fortunate, unfortunate, that's where we ended up. As it relates to surprises, I think the biggest surprise in all of this was I had been involved in acquisitions for years with Dynamics, and just the level of due diligence that's out there now was phenomenal. Nowhere near what I was involved with. So, quality of earnings and everything else, it certainly gets intense. Let's put it that way.
That's great insights. Thank you. Appreciate it, Bill. And maybe David, on your perspective too.
Thanks, Pete. I'm going to speak specifically about, I think for this platform, the sale of Key Point Carriers up in Woodstock. That was a truckload operation in our portfolio that, I guess, if I'm being dead honest, the reason we sold it, I didn't like the business anymore. We had another business in Guelph that was predominantly LTL, and I really like the LTL market much more than the truckload market. And that's a personal preference of myself and my partner, mainly because of the inability to control any pricing in the truckload market unless you're in a specialized area. So we put it up for sale, and it was a great time to do that. So from a motivation standpoint, and it's funny, this will mirror some of the things that Mike talked about, but we were ready to sell it. The business was performing very, very well. Financially, it was in great shape. It was an owner-operator business. And, I would say that we were probably at the highest level of owner-operators we'd ever been at that time, Pete, probably roughly.
That's right.
Our mileage targets were all being met, which was great, and our rate per mile was strong. So in the truckload market, there's no better time to sell, right? The other thing that was going on at the time, Mexico was really growing. I mean, plants were opening up on a consistent basis from both Canadians and US. So we had the extraordinary opportunity to have a really high percentage of direct customers, certainly on the outbound side. But as you all know here that are doing cross-border traffic, you're relying on the third-party market to get you back home. We had a really good strong for. So that was really our motivation for selling. It was the company was in a really great position to go to market. And I guess the second part of that, and I thought about this when Pete posed the question, were there any surprises? Not really. I guess we were surprised by the structure of the deal, which was very beneficial. But in terms of the process, and again, we've been through these before, so a lot of it was knowing and being prepared. But there were no surprises really in this transaction for us.
Great, thank you. Chris?
My circumstances were a little different. I have three partners. Two of them were 10 years older than me, and one 8 years my junior. So it became a point where all four of us are sitting in a meeting room and going, okay, the senior partners were becoming a little more risk adverse with their money. It comes to a time where you have to decide when is the time to get out. And they both wanted to get out. And I didn't want to take that position of buying both of them out at the time because I didn't want to go back into debt and be 70, 80 years old, still paying off bills. So Greg and I basically looked at each other and said, okay, let's do this. Let four of us agreed upon it and sold. Timing was perfect. It was the right thing to do. And I guess, I was talking to my wife last night, and she proposed this question to me. I think sometimes in life you just come up with a good gut feeling. You just know the time is right. And it's whether, how to explain that? It's kind of like you look at the older partners and you go, okay, Greg, do it. And I want to take this over. And it was just the right time for us. And it was pretty simple. It wasn't something that was long stretched. And it's about, I wanted to stay on board, which I did. And so did Greg in Los Angeles. And it was the best thing we ever did. It's great for us, both of us. Challenges, wow. I've never been through an experience like that in my life. Laflane did a great job of making sure that we were on the right track, which we knew we were, but they did the diligence that they put us through was amazing. And it put a feather in our cap because the affirmation afterwards was like, okay, we did the right things. And that was it. Pretty simple.
Right. Thank you, guys. Appreciate that. Next question I'm going to pose to everybody is about sort of the challenges that you face in the sale process. There's always some, whether big or small, and we see it all the time. And on our standpoint, there's always challenges from, getting people to sign a paper when they're in the Caribbean at the very last minute. Chris will know about that one. But there's a lot of challenges that go on. So maybe you could start off with Bill and ask him the biggest challenge that they faced.
Yeah, there were a couple of things. The first one was due diligence. I mean, it's very encompassing, and I'm not whining or moaning here, but we all have peak periods. Due diligence for us took place during a peak period, so it was extremely busy. Obviously, we don't have Dave in there helping us, but anyway, we got through it. We've got good people in place, and we were able to get through it. The second thing is our software, our operational software platform is Courier Complete. We were on an older version of Courier Complete, and we're on an older version of our accounting platform as well, Business Vision. And the folks that bought our business, very strong individuals on the financial side, and the data they were looking for, we just weren't able to spit it out from these systems, how they wanted it sliced and diced. So it took quite a bit of effort to get them what they needed. In some cases it was manual intervention to be able to get it done. But those were the two biggest challenges.
And David, what about yourself?
Yeah, sort of from a technical standpoint, with as it related to Key Point. Again, it was an owner-operator operation, but there were still about 300 trailers. And of course, if I think of a challenge, and again, it's just a technical thing, but the concept of valuation of those trailers, we closed this transaction in
January
2023, right? Yeah. So it went on for, the fall of 2022, but, equipment prices were all over the map. Some of the trailers were older, but they were all operational and functional. And that's what we turned over to the buyer. And of course, post-sale, there's always questions about, some of the trailers may not have been up to their standards. Anyway, we resolved all that. It all worked itself out quite well. Overall, from a challenge, I would say in any transaction, this is sort of at a higher level, is that it's definitely a distraction. So you've got a business to run as operators, as managers, as CEOs. And, we'll get to this question when we talk about advisors, but regardless, it's a challenge to be dealing with all the data that you're providing, especially if you're not involving other members of your team. If you're keeping it quite contained within yourself, a partner, or maybe one trusted employee or something like that. So the biggest challenge in any transaction I've done is probably the distraction that takes you away from operating the business day to day.
Okay, thanks, David. Chris?
Nice segue. That's exactly where I was going to go. I think for me, it's 35 years of working with my team and always being transparent with them and keeping them in the loop with every move, every action. And for me, it was emotionally distracting because I felt that I wasn't being honest with them, knowing that we're putting a company up for sale. It was a really hard pill to swallow, working with my team every day. And like David said, when I'm asking for certain financials to give to Left Lane, and my controller's going, why? Why wouldn't, what do you need that for? You never looked at that, you know? So there were certain things where I'd be asking questions of my team like I normally would never ask for. So the biggest challenge for me was the people, because I wanted them to stay after the sale, obviously for a few reasons, but it was a huge challenge. Again, I go back to it. Our affirmation was already done through the due diligence program, but that was a big challenge for me personally.
Great. No, thank you. Appreciate that. And I know we deal with like every one of our clients that we see, there's always, again, unique challenges that come up. And what we try to mitigate there is, you know, what Chris was talking about too, on how to handle those situations where, you know, people are asking why, right? So we're able to walk through quite a bit of that with them too, which is great. Next segment to just ask questions about our insights on, you know, what elements of your business were most attractive to acquirers. And maybe we'll start off with Bill and then Chris on that one.
Okay, so Swift 2.0, you know, first day on the job, we're looking at the business. It's predominantly on demand, predominantly envelope traffic, and 50% of the business is in the top 3 customers. So we immediately make the decision that, you know, we have to diversify the business. And that started with the service offerings and focusing more on 3D product versus envelope traffic. So on demand became expedited, became dedicated, became fleet. When we first looked at Swift, they had a couple bike couriers, they had cars, they had minivans, 1 cargo van and 1 dock truck. Well, we had to expand that. So we added more cargoes. We added some sprinters, cubes, 3 tons, more 5 tons. And we even went out and we've got 6 or 7 flatbeds, got some Moffats to go along with that. Then we took a look at the customer base, and we really focused on verticals, especially industrial. We targeted electrical supply companies, plumbing supply companies, roofing companies, metals, lumber, and that worked out really, really well for us. And the result of all of that was that now our top 3, our top 5, our top 10, our top 20 look really attractive, not only from a customer base, but from a revenue base as well. And that was very, very attractive. Also in non-peak periods, we were able to attract some seasonal work. So tires in the spring and the fall, fur coats in the spring and the fall. And in the spring, we were able to score some work out of southwestern Ontario with some of the nurseries and bulk flower deliveries to garden centers. That worked out really well for us. The other thing that was important is as we brought on customers, we really worked hard to diversify the customer relationship. And what I mean by that is, if you're looking at a business and there's, you know, 2 or 3 people that own the relationships with all the customers, that's concerning. So we set up our customer base that they knew they could call in, they could talk to Bill, Matt, Dave, Brandon. It didn't matter. They'd still receive the same level of service. So that was obviously an attraction. And I guess the final point is the people. You know, Swift just celebrated 44 years on Saturday. Giselle, the general manager, has been there for 42 years. Andy is the operations manager. He's been there for 40. Sean, CSR, has been there for 41. A lot of the drivers were there 25, have been there 25, 30, 35 years. So that boded very well with what the buyer was looking for. But more importantly, as we diversified the business, you know, sometimes you'll have people in your business, you know, I've done it this way all my life, I'm not changing. These people embraced change and grew with the business. And ultimately it boded well for all of us.
Great. No, thank you, Bill. And Chris with Liberty, What were some of the,
What elements of your business were most attractive? Well, we had a US operation up and running in Los Angeles for 25 years, and our Canadian operation 35 years in Canada. So that interested a lot of Americans that wanted to get into the Canadian market, and interested a lot of Canadians wanting to get in the US market. It's it's instantly there. It was set up, ran, incorporated both businesses in California and one in Canada. So it was for buyers that wanted to get into a different country, it was already put in front of them. And the KPIs, as mentioned earlier, we had Circle 8 business strategy that we used, dashboards completely on both sides of the border, and had our managers follow those dashboards on a weekly basis, monthly basis. And I know for a lot of buyers that, in my mind, everybody knows who we are, but what Left Lane did was expose us even farther than that. In my mind, I always thought everybody knows who Liberty is. And but that's my ego talking, right? So, but what they did was take us to another level. And then with that level is I was be able to perform with the KPIs that we already had in place on both sides of the border. So it was a nice selling feature for us, and it worked for us really well.
yeah, and a lot of buyers on that perspective want to, Bill was talking about earlier, couples with, what David and Chris said too, is they want data, and having data is very important. That's financial data, that's operational data, that's sales data. It's a, the times we live in, it's a data-driven society with cell phones and metrics and everything else. So being able to parse all that information is necessary. So having a platform set up with KPIs and tracking everything out from a business standpoint is necessary, right? It's not a want, it's a need now. So if you think about any of your businesses yourselves, just know that any potential purchaser is going to want as much data as humanly possible. So you got to lead with that. And that's where you get, again, sort of top value too.
Peter, can I just add to that on the
please.
KPIs? It's not just so much of the level that I need to see it on a daily basis. It was more of my team to see it and understand what they're actually reading and how valuable that is for their department, those areas. And that's one thing is, if you're preparing to sell, make sure your whole team understands KPIs right from the top to the bottom. Why are they there?
Great points. I mean, it's the old adage, you can't fix what you don't measure, right? You need to be able to measure it. Next question I'll just have for David himself on this one is, so what steps did you take to ensure a smooth transition during that exit phase that went on?
I think the biggest thing, if you, anybody that's sold a business in this room or is looking to sell a business, you're going to find, if you're emotionally attached to your business, which you probably are, you're thinking about, how am I going to tell my staff? How am I going to deal with that? That's going to cause you some anxiety. But your role is really to make sure you eliminate the anxiety of your staff once you do tell them, if you follow where I'm going. So these can go in very different directions depending on who your buyer is. So I wanted to make sure, and I'm going to talk to this transaction, that everyone knew why we were selling the business. And the good news for them was that the buyer was a Mexican buyer, that they were trying to get a footprint into Canada. They wanted our facility, our people, our management, our TMS systems, everything. So right off the bat, where we all think it's about us, everything else, the first thing your employees thinking about is, what about me? What about my family? What's going to happen? Well, in this case, nothing happened. Even to this day, that entire team, with very few exceptions, is still together. So from an impact standpoint, whether it goes that way or there might be some people who lose jobs, trying to eliminate as much anxiety with the staff is critical for transition. And showing them that the business is going to carry on in its current context. And again, that's not always the way it is. Some buyers want to tuck you into their systems, and there could be great upheaval. But if you're fortunate enough to have a situation like the one I just mentioned, it's very rewarding.
Right. No, great points there, David. So next question, we've got 2 questions left, and we'll get to questions. So lessons, and that's the sort of topic here is, are there any aspects of the process that you would have done differently now looking backwards? And maybe just get brief from Bill, then David and Chris.
Yeah, I think it ties into what Michael was saying this morning, where you need to plan. At some point, whether you want to or not, you're going to transition out of the business. So you might as well start to plan for it now. You know, looking back, there's a number of things we could have streamlined to have made it easier for everybody, ourselves and for the buyer. And I'm just going to share an example. Might be a bad example, but I'm going to share it just to give you a feel. So we have one customer that gives us multiple bulk small package deliveries, predominantly peak season, especially leading up to Christmas. They want to see one job per day, total revenue. They don't want any more than one order on their invoice per day. Our system will only allow us to pay 5 drivers on any one job. So let's say, for instance, we have 15 drivers out there today. We have to pay 15 drivers. So we generate the one job, we pay 5 drivers, we have to pay 10 more drivers. So now we take a house account, we zero revenue, we pay 5 drivers, we take another house account, zero revenue, we pay the 5 drivers, and we tie them all in notes. Sounds simple, doesn't it? Nick, quality of earnings, right? The exercise was a nightmare because now you're trying to tie it all back, and you're working with an accounting firm that doesn't understand your business, and you're trying to explain to them how you've made this work because this is the way we've always done it. But looking back, we could have very, very easily gone to our tech provider and said, listen, let's modify this screen so we can add unlimited amount of drivers, but we hadn't done that. So point being, if you have an opportunity now to streamline your business and prepare, because someday something's going to happen, whether you expect it or not, you might as well be ready to go.
Great point and good example too. I remember that. So David, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we've talked a lot about, and we're getting a little repetitive maybe, but we talked a lot about, being aware of the process. And so the last comment I'd make about that in terms of lessons is that it's a big time commitment. I think that you have to be accountable to your advisor or to whoever's representing you or to yourselves. You have to have timelines to make sure you stay on track with your transaction. Otherwise, and I don't know where it was brought up today, whether it was Mike or one of you guys, but it's going to fail. You're going to get deal fatigue. Things have to keep moving along in an organized and accountable manner. The other sort of lesson that, and this isn't just about Key Point, this is a lesson that I've learned from selling businesses, is you really have to listen to your buyer in those initial meetings. They will give you some keys or some indications of what their real buying motive might be, what they like about your company. You don't give away too much, but they'll give signals, and also what those challenges are. And these are things that you would probably pick up on, your advisor would pick up on, but don't ignore those things. Pay attention to them, focus on them, make sure you address them, because they don't go away, and they generally always come up in the first couple of introductory meetings. So pay attention to those things.
Great, thank you.
That's all I've got.
Oh, thank you, appreciate it, David. And Chris.
Going back to what David said was the timeline. When we put our company up for sale, I said to my wife, okay, so next 24 months of her life is going to be tied to the business. And her comment was, well, isn't it already? So we spent 35 years building the business, and then selling the business was 2 years. Commit yourself to that 2 years. Put your effort into it. You built that business over 35 years. Don't plan on big trips after you get that check. Put yourself into the shoes of your employees. Be there for them, because it's all about earnout as well. But your employees are the one who are going to support that to get you to that point, right? And the other lesson that I learned was in investment banking, there's a lot of acronyms that I did not know. And that was hard. I used to be, emailing Alex all the time. What does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean? And they're using acronyms that I never heard of. So that'd be something, Peter, that you might want to give to a potential buyer, right? A list of acronyms.
It's true. I've got a pet peeve of always putting acronyms without putting the definition beforehand. I always got to do that. So, the last question for everybody here, then we'll get into the Q&A with anybody here sitting here today is what were your motivations for leveraging an advisor when you decided to do that and exit? So maybe start with Bill and then go through the panel.
Yeah, having worked at Dynamics and years and years of acquisitions and due diligence, I've been asked, why would you not have done it yourself? Well, first and foremost, I've been out of the game for so long. Other people have the connections. I don't have the connections anymore, number one. But number two, we wanted to keep it fair, the integrity level high for Dave and his family. We wanted to do what was right for all of them. And so that's why we decided to go out and source an advisor. And what we did is we interviewed 3 companies and ultimately decided on Left Lane. They have the connections on the buy side, sell side. They buy side, sell side, and they're very, very strong here in Canada. But just as important from an advisory standpoint, you might have a brother-in-law in real estate law, or your sister might be a bookkeeper, but what do they know about M&A? We had LaBarge Weinstein in Ottawa working for us, Debbie Weinstein, very well known across Canada. And we had GGFL, Lyman Gardner, working for us on the accounting side. These are people that are in the weeds every day and understand what it's like to work on M&A. So I would strongly recommend that as you're looking for an advisor, you make sure you've got the right people on your team, just like your businesses. You want the right people on the bus, right seats. You want to have the same when you're looking to sell your business. As it relates to the relationship, I mean, we're going to take Left Lane out of the room for the moment. They're really good people, honestly. When Nick, who's pacing it in the back there, when he called me up and said, would you come and sit on a panel, drive to Ottawa on your dime, come up here? And I said right away, yes, absolutely I would, because they were so good to us through this process. And the other side of that is, you want somebody in the middle. You want somebody, you don't want to be the bad cop when you're negotiating a deal. You probably are going to end up working with the person that's buying or selling your business. So you want to be on their good side. By having someone like Left Lane in the middle, they could field the tough questions. They could field the tough negotiations, and that still keeps you whole with the other party when everything's done and Left Lane's gone on to their next deal. So I thought that was really important. And the other side of it is, sometimes you get on a conference call and you get off the call and you say, what the hell just happened? Like, is this deal off the rails? Where have we lost this, or it gets heated, or they're not making concessions, or something's going on. And you go through the next couple of hours, and you're getting ready to go home, and this is on your mind. You're weighted with this. You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And then the phone rings, and it's Alex, or it's Nick, or it's Anton. And they ask you, how's your day going? What's happening today? And then they'll loop back to the earlier call and say, yeah, got a little heated, didn't it? Yeah, you're damn right it did. You know what? Don't worry about it. That's why we're here. We've seen this before. We've done this before. Don't worry about it. We'll get that straightened out for you. And all of a sudden, the weight of the world is off your shoulders. And how do you put a price on that, right? Well, maybe Pete would figure that out.
It's true.
You know, how do you put a price on that, right? So again, I offered to come here. I was invited. I agreed to come here simply because they are really good people, great to work with. You know, you got to make your own decisions, but they were the right fit for us.
So, thank you. I wasn't expecting that, but thanks, Bill. David.
Did you think you were coming here to get sucked into a left lane commercial? Christ. You know, in all seriousness, I think whether it's left lane or it's anyone for that matter, why would, let's put the question this way, why wouldn't you hire an advisor? It's because you looked at the fees and you think it's too much money. That's the only reason you wouldn't do it. Like there's no other reason. But the value that an advisor can bring to you is your own time. If you haven't sold before, you don't realize how much, to Bill's point, emotion goes into trying to negotiate directly with the buyer. Believe me, I've done that. How much of your time goes into assembling data for the data room. And most of us in this room right now are in a battle, in a business battle. The market's crap. We're trying to come out of this, this freight recession that Pete talked about. The last thing you want to do is split your time up anymore. You'd rather just be fed good news or positive news from your advisor. Let them look after it. You still have a lot of work to do, but you've got businesses to run. And that's how I have always looked at it. You know, make sure you're in the process. You've got accountability. You're providing the data, but let someone else look after the daily ins and outs of dealing with the targets and the specifics related to the transaction.
Great points. Thank you, David. Appreciate it. And final with Chris.
Yeah, going on with the left lane commercial. That was good. For us, basically, I'm speaking from the bottom of my heart. I am so glad we went with left lane. For you here today that are thinking about selling and preparing for it, and you're wondering, should I go with left lane? Absolutely 100%. 35 years of my life was spent building a business. I'm not going to sell that business on my own or get my accountant to sell it or get my lawyer or my neighbor or my friend's neighbor that knows somebody. Go with the professionals. Go with somebody that you can trust. And also what Left Lane did for us, they sold our business to people that we wanted to sell to. The fit was like a glove. It worked perfectly for us. Our employees are happy. Everyone is satisfied. We work with a buyer out of New York, Alex, Nick, and you remember that conversation? They were so focused on one thing. And I was watching this whole deal and I was like, who is this? Who are these people? It didn't make any sense to me. And that's when the epiphany went. I said to myself, I'm so glad we're with Lifeline because they're diversified in all different areas of our business, which was a huge godsend. I think if you're going to do it, use Left Lane. And again, I'm not going back to the commercial. I'm going back from what I experienced. It was absolutely perfect in my world.
Thank you, Chris, and everybody too. And something I would say too to anybody here looking at when it comes time to look at hiring an advisor for anything. This could be for legal, for be accounting, or for M&A. Is ask. I always ask like 4 questions. What's your specialization? Do you have one? Right. You want somebody to specialize in the space that you're in. Right. If it's food and beverage, that's not our cup of tea. We don't do that. Right. So you want to work with people that understand the space you're in so they could translate that to a buyer or a potential buyer. So I think that's always important. And the same thing with, Bill was mentioning about lawyers and accounts. You want to find accounts that are M&A accounts or M&A lawyers, right? Going with what Chris said, their, neighbors, friends, cousins, somebody. Pick people that are professionals that know the space, because this is where 35 years plus of energy is gone. So you want to make sure you make the right choices. And another good thing we always, recommend is you want people to be in this space, that they're operating into. From, everyone here predominantly is in the supply chain space, trucking, logistics, warehousing, etc. So whenever you're talking to somebody else that saying, hey, look, we understand the space, ask them what they do in it. Are they part of associations? Are they part of charitable events in the space? Do they intermingle in that space? Because I think that's important. How you gain knowledge, that's how you get the benefit of transacting with people that understand that knowledge and understand that space. If you're not in it, it's really hard to understand it. So I think that's always important, whatever the space you're in. So whoever you work with on, again, accounting, legal, or M&A, make sure they are in the space that you're in. So, as again, wanted to say thank you very much to everybody here on the panel. I know we'll just go into a couple questions and then we'll tee it off. Does anybody have questions? We've got Josh going to be roaming around with a mic. So if anybody has any questions, we'll see about 1 or 2 questions. And
well, I can go ahead. We have a question that we received from one of our live stream registrants, and anyone else, if you'd like to ask a question afterwards, please just put up your hand or I'll walk over to you. But you've already spoken a bit about, you know, the things that you've learned throughout the entire transaction process. But what's one piece of advice you wish you had received before beginning the transaction process?
I think it comes back to you know what I had said earlier. I mean, we would have streamlined some things. We would have been, you know, a little better prepared. And it goes back to what Mike said. Sometimes, you know, the sale comes up unexpectedly, right? And you know, start to prepare now. Start to prepare now.
good point. Any other questions?
Pete, am I allowed to ask a question?
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah, it depends.
So I find it interesting, and I touch on this briefly about your use of professional advisors, in particular lawyers and accountants. And you know, we strongly recommend that people work with accountants and lawyers who have done M&A work in the past. And I'm just asking your comments relative, because we've actually had some deals go sideways because of lawyers and accountants. Because what we found historically is that often, especially on the sell side, they're losing a client. That's hard to get back. So I'm just curious, any experience you've had in your history with accountants and lawyers, and just what advice you might be able to give the people relative to how important that is to actually get people aligned with the process ahead of time and just not go to your default like I did, which is my Barlow House account, my account, and that was a big mistake. I'll just leave that to the panel if there's any comments on that.
Yeah. Bill, maybe.
I mean, you know, the bottom line is if you have a heart condition, you're going to go to a cardiologist, right? I mean, you want to get the right person representing you. And sometimes like David said, sometimes it comes down to fees. So, you know, your accountant's going to charge you whatever the number is, 25, 30,000, but your sister's a bookkeeper and she's going to do it for 5. What's the service you're going to get? I mean, the bottom line is surround yourself with professionals. We spoke earlier about Megan and setting up your business. There's all kinds of things that you can do to sell your business the right way. I mean, everybody in the room, we've worked hard. We've worked really hard. We've sacrificed to get where we are today. And you want to do it right. You want to maximize your efforts, not only for you, but your families. And if you've got partners, for them as well. And I mean, I've, you know, back when I was with Dynamics, I seen some deals as well where, you know, and I use the example of a real estate lawyer, and that's exactly who he was. And it was a challenge. You know, we had to educate him to get the deal done. So, you know, get the right people in the right seats on your bus. Make sure you talk to them about fees up front so you understand it. There's going to be a range. What moves the meter on that range? Make sure you understand all of that up front. But do yourselves a favor, do it right the first time. You will not regret it.
And often for most clients of ours, actually good stat, I always where I'm off, 92% of entrepreneurs in North America are single entrepreneurs, one-time business owners, 92%. So there's very few that are multiple entrepreneurs. So you have one time to do it correctly. Perfect. Any other questions? So
I was going to ask a question. So I just sold my business, and I think it's more, maybe of a personal question, but especially being in transport I own my business for 11 years. What did you do after you sold? Like, did you buy another business? Like, I'm kind of, you know, I thought I'd be sitting on a beach, but, you know, it lasted about a month, and then I'm just itching to do something. So did you buy another business? Did you partner with somebody? Did you stay within supply chain? Any advice for somebody that sold that kind of is going, okay, now what do I do?
Maybe I should answer that because I sold twice and went into a different space, went into the brokering M&A deal similar to Left Lane, but on a much, much smaller scale. But, you know, I get what you mean about being itchy. I certainly didn't want to spend my winters in Florida. I like doing deals. And that's why I got back into buying assets and buying companies, is that I just missed the action. You know, some people just say, you know, I want to get out and travel, but for me, it's like, okay, now what do I do after 3 months? So it's a real good idea to have hobbies, interests, other things. Mike's career is very much the same. I mean, when he sold MSM, he probably didn't envision he'd be doing what he's doing today, whether it's 1 day a week, 2 days a week, or 5 days a week, right? But some people just like to not work, but just stay engaged. So it's finding what makes you happy. And it may, for you, it might just be getting back into business of some sort, you know, without taking a big risk with the money that you made, because that could be a disaster as well, right? Stick to your knitting, know what you know.
And don't break that non-compete, non-solicit. That too.
Unless you're really quiet about it.
Yeah.
Does
Any
anyone
other
else-
questions?
Yep. Anyone else have any other questions? Moving the mic over.
Great. Again, if without any other questions, and anybody could always ask any of us too if we're around. Again, want to thank our panelists here for coming up here today and making the trek from Ottawa. He got away from the snow today, so just came down south. And again, appreciate everybody here from Bill to David to Chris and everybody that came today to listen to us and have some lunch. And again, appreciate your time here. We're always here to answer any questions, whether it's here or offsite or on a phone call. So don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you guys for coming. Appreciate it.